Now we are moving to the last speaker of this session, Dr. Nitai Saha, Assistant Professor, Munshi Premchand Mahavidyalaya, Siliguri, India. Dr. Nitai Saha will make a presentation on Tagore's Discourse on
Yeah, I want to
Cultural
share my
Heritage
screen.
Translation Studies.
I want to
You
share
will
my
have
screen.
12 to 15 minutes for your presentation.
Sir, I want to
Yes.
share my screen. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think now we can share.
Yes. Is it visible now? Yes. My screen is visible. Hello. Is it visible now? Hello.
Yes, sir, it is visible. It is very well visible, sir.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So thank you everyone present here. And I thank my friend, Dr. Mahbub and Professor Mashrur here for giving me an opportunity to deliver my lecture. I would talk about Tagore's pioneering role in translation, especially in the context of cultural translation. Long before translation studies actually formally emerged as a discipline in the West, I would like to talk on this topic. First of all, let me talk about what Roman Jacobson said about translation. He defined translation as an interpretation. So that is something very important, because translation is not only translation, it can be an interpretation of the original. And we know this name, William Radice, and his emphasis on imaginative insight and the translator's influence. And now, how did he present his case, William Radice? Translation, as understood by Radice, is not the mere transfer of literal meanings of words or expressions from one language to another. It is an imaginative insight into the life, the creative works, and the thought processes of a writer one is translating. Now, the point is that, let me come to the next point. Radice also, in his essay, The Challenge of Translating Tagore, he sums up the true nature of his Tagore translation. I quote, "As a poet himself, but as a poet myself, and one for whom the sounds and rhythm of poetry have always been immensely important, I found myself responding to the sounds of Rabindranath's poems in as instinctive and intuitive way. I cannot claim, even now, that I hear the poems in quite the same way as a native speaker would hear them, but they immediately get translated from the very first reading into sounds and rhythm that are natural to me in my mother tongue." Now, my next slide, what Walter Benjamin thinks about translation. What is the task of the translator? In the task of the translator, Walter Benjamin identifies something unfathomable, something imaginative, something poetic about the creative works of a great writer. And a literal or word for word translation is incapable of capturing the spirit and essence of their originals. That is something very important. When you are translating, it is not possible to translate word for word, to go for word translation, because one needs to capture the very spirit and essence of the original works. Now, let me talk about other critics. Reuben Arthur Brewer comparison of translation to original authors. This is something very, very important. In the introduction to his book on translation, Reuben Arthur Brower refers to the translator as a creator, not a translator, but a creator. And he can be easily equated with the original author. He also adds, in spite of the fact that the study of the creative process has been a matter of speculation since Plato and has become increasingly fashionable since Coleridge, it is surprising how little attention has been given to the obscure business of reenacting someone else's creation. That is what Reuben Arthur said about translation. Let me quote another critic. And neither's idea of the stamp of personality in the translations. In his epoch-making book Towards a Science of Translation, neither says the human translator is not a machine. This is something very important. So we know that a human being is a bundle of contradictions, is a bundle of emotions and feelings. So we cannot call him a machine. And he inevitably leaves the stamp of his personality on any translation he makes. So that is why we do not go for this word-for-word translation. This stamp of personality unconsciously colors the interpretation of a translator. The translator interprets the text in his own way. It may surpass the original text itself. Now what happened? What about Tagore's contribution? Tagore's contribution aligned with the key modern translation theories. What about Tagore? Actually, Tagore viewed translation not merely as a linguistic transaction, but a form of rewriting, creative translation, we call it. An idea later recognized in academic critics as, self-translation or transcreation. So emphasis has been on creative process, emotional loyalty, that whether a translator is able to capture that emotion of the original text, and all, of course, cultural negotiation. Actually, what is the important point? His work paved the way for recognizing the subjective and creative aspects of translation. That means he focused on decoding and recoding emotions and thoughts from one language to another, processes that became central in modern translation theories. Now, Buddhadev Bose's view of Tagore as an elusive poet. You know what Matthew Arnold said about Shakespeare? Matthew Arnold said, "Others abide our attention, thou art free." He meant to say, the others easily draw our attention, but thou art free. We cannot catch hold of Shakespeare because nothing is exactly known about Shakespeare's biography and everything. No? Tagore is like that kind of mysterious poet. Very difficult to understand, very difficult to define. That's why Buddhadev Bose came up with this quotation that, with this statement that Tagore is one of the most elusive poets of the modern times. And the rendering or the translation of such an elusive poet undoubtedly presents formidable challenges for a translator. That is why literal or word-for-word translation cannot capture, I have pointed it out again, already, cannot capture the spirit of the creative works of such an elusive and imaginative poet like Tagore. And once again, let me talk about Radice. In 10 Rules of Translating Tagore, Radice seems to have mentioned, once again, I would like to shed light on that interpretive role played by the translator in the act of translating. He is less a translator and more an interpreter. That is what I would like to say. So what he said, Radice, I quote, "The personality of the translator always comes into play." So we cannot ignore the personality of the translator. A translation of a poem can never be like a photo or a carbon copy of the original. what Radice implies here is that the intrusion of the personality of the translator into a translation makes it interpretive on the one hand and creative on the other. Very important point. So what I'm saying, listen to me. This is the thing. Tagore's pioneering role in translation studies, his approach to translation and rewriting and creative translation, I have already pointed it out, and self-translation of Gitanjali and its significance. Actually, what happens? Tagore's approach to translation was deeply connected to the idea of rewriting rather than the direct literal translation. In his letters and reflections, what do you find? Tagore often spoke of the process of translation as an act of recreation, translating not just the words, but the underlying sentiments, emotions, and cultural essence from one language to another. This concept of translation as rewriting or creative translation contrasts with more rigid literal approaches. And that is what I'm trying to say. Now, the point I want to make, just see, what about Tagore? That means Tagore thinks translation is a kind of, what kind of process it is? Translation as rewriting or recreation. This process involves conveying emotions, not only emotion, but the cultural essence, not just in words. Actually, what happens, one of Tagore's significant contributions to the translation theory is his articulation of dual processes of decoding and recoding. In translating his works from Bengali to English, Tagore emphasized what? He emphasized capturing the spirit and emotions of the original text. I'm talking about decoding, and re-expressing them in the target language. That means recoding. That is something important. That resonance with later concepts of transcreation and cultural negotiation. So what I'm talking about, listen to me. So what I have already said, that Tagore's translation involved capturing the spirit of the text, original text, and adapting it to the target language, recoding. So modern parallels with the dynamic view of translation in contemporary theory. And I have already pointed out these two things also: emotional and cultural fidelity, loyalty as central components, right? So what I'm trying to say, although he did not use these terms explicitly, his reflections on translation connect with modern translation theory, because which considers translation as a dynamic process. Translation is a dynamic process involving cultural and emotional negotiation, not just linguistic transfer. That is what I wanted to say. So what I'm saying, listen to me, very important point. Tagore adapted his works for a Western audience, Western readers, considering cultural and aesthetic terms. So what is the point? We need to understand that translation is more than a linguistic act. It is a negotiation between cultures. Tagore faced certain challenges when he was translating his works for a Western readers, Western audience. So that is why he was very much conscious of the fact that he needs to adapt his poetry to fit the cultural and aesthetic expectations of his target readers. Very important. When you are translating, you should keep in mind your target readers. That is why I'm talking about this cultural turn. Tagore was addressing the same issues that would later define as cultural turn or in translation studies. That the idea is that translation is not is an act of cultural mediation as much it is one of language. The role of translation as an act of cultural mediation. So what I'm talking about, that Tagore's practice anticipated the concept of transcreation. What is transcreation? Actually, transcreation is a creative process that involves adapting content from one language to another while maintaining original, style, tone, intent, context, everything. That's why he can be easily compared with other translators like Vladimir Nabokov or Samuel Beckett, because I'm talking about insights into the interpretive and creative roles of translators, right? So what I'm talking about, that this self-translation process where Tagore translated what? He translated his works himself, allowed him to engage in what? What he termed as rewriting or recreation, right? So what I'm saying, my final thoughts on the topic, I should talk about Tagore's legacy as a precursor to cultural translation, his translation approaches as invaluable to contemporary discussions, continuing relevance in understanding the art and science of translation. Thank you so much.